The words hit the room like a slap. This is not your home anymore. Vanessa stood in the doorway, arms folded, her voice cold and steady. For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Adrian Ndlovu looked around slowly, taking in the living room he had known for years, the worn leather couch, the framed photos, the faint smell of Polish and old wood. This place held memories, laughter, and long nights of silence. And now, just like that, he was being told it was no longer his. Brian leaned against the wall behind Vanessa, avoiding eye contact. Grace sat on the chair near the window, her hands tightly clasped together, saying nothing. Adrian felt the weight of their silence more than Vanessa's words. It wasn't just what she said. It was how easily everyone else allowed it. He took a slow breath. "What do you mean?" he asked calmly. Vanessa let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Don't act confused, Adrian. You've stayed here long enough. It's time to leave." Her tone carried something sharp, something final. Adrian studied her face, searching for a hint of doubt, but there was none. Only confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you have already won. Brian shifted slightly, clearing his throat, but still said nothing. Adrian noticed that. He noticed everything. The way Brian avoided his eyes. The way Grace looked down at her hands. The way Vanessa stood was like she owned not just the house, but the moment itself. Adrian nodded slowly, as if he was processing her words. Inside, something stirred, but it wasn't panic. It wasn't anger either. It was something quieter. Something controlled. "So that's it," he said softly. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "That's it," she replied. "I've made arrangements. You can pack your things and leave today." The word arrangements lingered in the air. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "Arrangements?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Yes. This house is no longer yours to stay in." There it was again. That certainty. That final push. Adrian let out a small breath, then looked around one more time. His gaze paused briefly on the photo of him and his late father, standing proudly in front of this very house years ago. Something flickered in his eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly. He turned back to Vanessa. And then, something unexpected happened. Adrian smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a bitter one. A calm, quiet smile that didn't match the situation at all. Vanessa frowned slightly, clearly thrown off. "What's funny?" she asked. Adrian shook his head gently. "Nothing," he said. "I just didn't expect this to happen today." Brian finally looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Adrian glanced at him briefly, then back at Vanessa. "I thought you would wait a little longer." Vanessa's frown deepened. "Wait for what?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out his phone. The room grew tense again, but this time for a different reason. Vanessa watched him closely. "Who are you calling?" she demanded. Adrian looked at the screen, then back at her, his calm smile still there. "Just someone who will help clear things up," he said. Brian pushed himself off the wall, uneasy now. "Adrian, what's going on?" Adrian didn't look at him. "You'll see," he replied simply. Grace finally spoke, her voice low and uncertain. "Adrian, maybe we can talk about this," but Adrian shook his head gently. "We are talking," he said. "Just not in the way you expected." Vanessa crossed her arms again, trying to regain control. "You can call whoever you want. It won't change anything." Adrian met her eyes, his expression steady. "We'll see." The phone rang once. Twice. Then someone picked up. Adrian's smile widened just slightly. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "Yes." "It's time." The room fell completely silent. Vanessa's confidence wavered for the first time. Brian looked between them, clearly unsure now. Grace's hands tightened even more. Adrian ended the call after a few short words and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Whatever was coming, he already knew. And deep down, so did they. He took one last look around the room, then back at Vanessa. "You said this isn't my home anymore," he said quietly. "Let's find out if that's true." No one responded. No one moved. The air felt heavier now, filled with something none of them could name yet. But it was coming. Adrian could feel it. And this time, he wasn't the one being pushed out. He turned slightly, facing forward as if speaking not just to them, but to someone beyond the room. "If you think you already know how this ends," he said with a calm confidence, "you might be wrong." His eyes held a quiet strength, a promise of something bigger about to unfold. "Stay with me," he added, his voice steady. "Because this is just the beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and be part of this story." The silence after the call felt heavier than the words that came before it. No one spoke. No one moved. Adrian stood calmly, his expression unchanged, while the tension in the room slowly tightened like a rope being pulled from both ends. Vanessa was the first to break. "Who did you call?" she asked again, this time with less confidence and more urgency. Adrian did not answer immediately. He walked past her slowly, his step steady, and stopped near the window where Grace sat today. He looked down at her for a brief moment, then out through the glass, as if remembering something far away. "You'll find out soon," he said quietly. Vanessa turned sharply, clearly irritated now. "I'm not playing games with you, Adrian. You need to leave." Adrian nodded slightly, still looking out the window. "You've said that already." Brian stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Adrian, if there's something we need to know, just say it." Adrian turned back to face them, his calm gaze moving from Brian to Vanessa. "That's the problem," he said. "There's a lot you should have known." Vanessa let out a sharp breath. "Enough of this. This house was left under my control, and I've decided, under your control." Adrian interrupted gently, not raising his voice, but cutting through her words with precision. Vanessa paused, caught off guard. Adrian took a step closer, his presence suddenly more noticeable. "Interesting," he said. "Because that's not what I remember." Grace shifted in her chair, her face tense. "Adrian," she began, but her voice faded before she could finish. Adrian looked at her again, this time with something deeper in his eyes. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just a quiet understanding. "Do you remember the day we all sat in this room after the funeral?" he asked softly. No one answered. But they all remembered. The air changed instantly, pulling them back into a memory none of them could escape. "You were all here," Adrian continued. Vanessa stood right there. "Brian, you were by the door. And you," he looked at Grace. "You couldn't stop crying." Grace lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. Vanessa crossed her arms again, trying to hold on to control. "That has nothing to do with this." Adrian gave a small nod. "It has everything to do with this." He walked toward the center of the room, his voice steady but carrying weight now. "Because that was the day everything changed. Or at least, that's what I thought." Brian frowned. "What do you mean?" Adrian looked at him. "I mean, I trusted all of you." The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Trust doesn't change ownership." Adrian smiled faintly. "No? But truth does." That word landed differently. Truth. It made the room feel smaller, tighter. Vanessa took a step forward, her patience wearing thin. "You keep talking in circles. Say what you have to say or leave." Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You nervous?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "I'm not nervous." Adrian nodded again. Then you won't mind waiting a little longer. Brian ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed now. Waiting for what, Adrian? Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the old cabinet near the wall. He ran his fingers lightly across its surface, as if tracing the past. This house, he said slowly, was never just a building. He turned back to them. It was a promise. Grace looked up suddenly, her eyes wide. Adrian met her gaze. You remember that, don't you? Grace opened her mouth, but no words came out. Vanessa stepped in quickly, her voice sharp. This is pointless. Whatever promise you think existed doesn't matter now. Adrian's expression didn't change. It matters more than you think. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't just tension. It was something else. Something closer to fear. Brian looked between Adrian and Vanessa, unsure who to believe anymore. Vanessa, what is he talking about? He asked. Vanessa didn't answer him. Her focus was locked on Adrian. You're trying to confuse everyone, she said. But it won't work. Adrian gave a soft chuckle. I don't need to confuse anyone. The truth does that on its own. Just then, there was a sound. A knock at the door. Sharp. Clear. Unexpected. Everyone froze. Vanessa's eyes flickered toward the entrance. Brian straightened up. Grace's hands tightened again. Adrian, however, remained completely calm. He glanced briefly toward the door, then back at Vanessa. That didn't take long, he said quietly. Vanessa swallowed, her confidence slipping just a little more. Who is that? She asked, her voice no longer as strong as before. Adrian's smile returned, calm and certain. The person who's going to answer all your questions. The knock came again, louder this time. No one moved. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Adrian took a step toward the door, then paused. He looked back at them one last time. You said this isn't my home anymore, he said softly. Let's see if that's really true. He reached for the handle. And in that moment, everything was about to change. Adrian's hand rested on the door handle for a brief second, and in that small pause, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa stood frozen, her eyes fixed on him, while Brian shifted uneasily behind her. Grace didn't move at all. The tension had grown into something thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Adrian finally turned the handle and pulled the door open. Standing outside was a man in a clean dark suit, holding a slim black folder under his arm. His posture was straight, his expression calm and professional. He stepped forward slightly and gave a polite nod. Good afternoon, he said. I'm looking for Adrian Ndlovu. Adrian stepped aside just enough to gesture him in. You found him, he replied. The man entered the house slowly, his eyes scanning the room in a quick but careful way, as if taking note of everything without making it obvious. Vanessa's voice came out sharp, though there was a slight crack in it now. Who are you? She demanded. The man turned toward her, still composed. My name is James Ndlovu, he said. I'm an attorney. The word attorney landed hard. Brian's eyes widened slightly. Grace looked up in shock. Vanessa tried to keep her expression firm, but the shift was clear. Adrian closed the door gently behind Mr. Ndlovu and walked back into the room, standing beside him. I believe you said this is no longer my home, Adrian said calmly, looking at Vanessa. She lifted her chin, forcing her confidence back. Yes, I did. And bringing a lawyer here doesn't change that. Mr. Ndlovu gave a small, polite smile. That depends, he said. On what the documents say. Vanessa's jaw tightened. What documents? Mr. Ndlovu opened the black folder slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Legal documents regarding the ownership and rights to this property, he replied. Brian stepped closer, his curiosity and worry growing. What is going on? He asked quietly. Adrian didn't look at him. His focus stayed on Vanessa. You were very sure earlier, Adrian said. I hope you're just as sure now. Vanessa crossed her arms again, but this time it looked more like a shield than a show of power. Go ahead, she said. Let's see what you think you have. Mr. Ndlovu pulled out a set of papers and held them carefully. These documents were signed and registered several years ago, he began. They clearly state the legal owner of this property. Grace leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Who is the owner? Mr. Ndlovu glanced briefly at Adrian, then back at the papers. The property is registered under the name of Adrian Ndlovu. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Everything changed in that instant. Vanessa blinked, clearly stunned. That's not possible, she said quickly. That's not what we were told. Mr. Ndlovu looked at her calmly. What you were told and what is legally recorded are not always the same. Brian looked at Adrian, confusion written all over his face. Adrian, you never said anything about this. Adrian finally turned to him, his expression steady. You never asked. Grace's hands trembled as she covered her mouth. But, your father, Adrian nodded slowly. Yes. My father made sure everything was handled properly before he passed. Vanessa shook her head, her voice rising slightly. No. This doesn't make sense. I was given control. I was told, you were told what you wanted to hear, Adrian said gently, cutting her off. That hit harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa's confidence cracked further. You're lying, she said, though it sounded less certain now. Mr. Ndlovu stepped forward slightly, holding out the documents. You're welcome to review them, he said. They are fully valid and legally binding. Vanessa didn't take the papers. She just stared at them, as if refusing to accept what they represented. Brian looked between them, his voice quieter now. So, this whole time, Adrian was the owner? Adrian nodded once. Yes. Silence filled the room again, but it was different this time. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was realization. The kind that slowly sinks in and changes everything. Grace lowered her head, her voice shaking. Why didn't you say anything? Adrian looked at her, his expression soft but firm. Because I wanted to see who you all really were when you thought I had nothing. That truth settled heavily on all of them. Vanessa finally took a step back, her posture no longer strong. This doesn't change anything, she said weakly. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. It changes everything. Mr. Ndlovu closed the folder calmly. Legally, Adrian has full authority over this property, he said. Which means any decision regarding who stays and who leaves is his. Those words shifted the balance completely. Vanessa's breath caught slightly. Brian looked down, unable to meet Adrian's eyes anymore. Grace sat in silence, overwhelmed. Adrian took a slow step forward, his calm presence now carrying quiet power. He looked directly at Vanessa. You said this is not my home anymore, he said softly. But it never stopped being mine. Vanessa didn't respond. She couldn't. For the first time, she had no control, no argument, no ground to stand on. Adrian glanced briefly around the room, taking in the faces that once felt like family. Then he looked back at Vanessa. Now, he said calmly, we're going to have a different conversation. The room did not feel the same anymore. Just a few minutes ago, Vanessa had stood tall, confident, certain that she was in control. Now, that confidence had slipped through her fingers, leaving behind something weaker, something uncertain. Adrian stood quietly in the center of it all, his calm presence now carrying a weight no one could ignore. Mr. Ndlovu remained beside him, composed and silent, like a witness to a truth that could no longer be denied. Brian leaned back against the wall again, but this time it wasn't casual. It was as if his legs no longer trusted him to stand properly. Grace still sat near the window, her eyes lowered, her hands resting in her lap, but her silence now felt heavier than before. Adrian took a slow breath, then looked directly at Vanessa. You wanted me out, he said calmly. Now let's talk about that. Vanessa swallowed, trying to steady herself. This doesn't change everything, she said, though her voice no longer held the same strength. We still live here. We still have a right, Adrian interrupted gently. Based on what? Vanessa hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Adrian stepped a little closer, not aggressively, but with quiet certainty. Because from where I stand, he continued, the only thing that was clear earlier was your decision to push me out. Brian looked up, his face filled with guilt now. Adrian, it wasn't like that, he said softly. Adrian turned his head slightly toward him. Then what was it like? Brian opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing simple enough to explain what had just happened. Adrian nodded slightly, as if that silence gave him all the answers he needed. He turned back to Vanessa. You said you made arrangements, he said. I'm curious, what kind of arrangements? Vanessa's eyes flickered, her composure struggling to hold. That's not important anymore, she replied quickly. Adrian gave a faint smile. It is to me. Mr. Ndlovu adjusted his grip on the folder, watching quietly as the moment unfolded. Adrian's tone remained calm, but there was a clear shift now. He was no longer defending himself. He was in control. Because when someone decides to remove me from my own home, Adrian continued, I like to understand exactly how far they were willing to go. Vanessa looked away briefly, unable to hold his gaze for long. That alone said more than words ever could. Grace finally spoke, her voice soft and filled with regret. Adrian, we didn't think. Adrian looked at her, his expression steady. That's the problem, he said. You didn't think. The words were simple, but they carried truth that cut deep. Grace lowered her head again, unable to respond. Adrian let the silence sit for a moment, not rushing, not filling it. He understood something now that the others were only beginning to realize. Power wasn't about raising your voice. It wasn't about forcing control. It was about knowing when to speak, and when to let the truth speak for itself. He took another step, his eyes moving slowly across the room. This house, he said quietly, was built on trust. He paused, letting that sink in. Not just walls. Not just ownership. Trust. Brian shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. Vanessa said nothing. Adrian looked back at her. And today, he continued, you showed me exactly how much that trust meant to you. Vanessa clenched her jaw slightly. You're trying to make this bigger than it is, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Adrian shook his head gently. No, he replied. You already made it bigger the moment you told me to leave. That landed hard. Vanessa had no response. For the first time, she stood there without a single word to defend herself. Adrian glanced at Mr. Ndlovu briefly, then back at the others. Legally, I have every right to decide what happens next, he said. But this isn't just about the law. He paused again, his voice softening just slightly. It's about choices. Brian looked up again. What are you saying? He asked quietly. Adrian met his eyes. I'm saying, every action has a consequence. The room grew still once more, but now there was a quiet understanding building beneath it. Adrian wasn't rushing to throw anyone out. He wasn't reacting out of anger. That made it even more powerful.
Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice lower now. So what, you're just going to kick us out? Adrian looked at her carefully. You expect me to do exactly what you just did to me? Vanessa didn't answer. Adrian nodded slightly. That would be easy, he said. But I don't make decisions like that. He walked slowly toward the center of the room again, his posture relaxed but controlled. I believe in clarity, he continued. In making sure everyone understands where they stand. Grace looked up again, hope and fear mixed in her eyes. Adrian raised his hand gently, stopping her before she could continue. Not yet, he said softly. Then he looked at all of them, one by one. Because before anything else happens, he added, his voice steady and calm, there's something you all need to hear, something that should have been clear from the beginning. He paused, letting the moment build, letting the weight of his words settle. This house is mine, he said. But what happens next depends on you. The room fell completely silent again, but this time it wasn't filled with tension alone. It was filled with something deeper. Consequence. And for the first time, everyone in that room understood, the real decision had just begun. No one spoke after Adrian's last words. The silence in the room felt different now. It was no longer just tension or shock. It was something heavier. Something that forced everyone to think about what they had done and what could happen next. Adrian stood still, watching them carefully, giving them time. He was not in a hurry. For him, this moment had been a long time coming. Vanessa shifted her weight, her arms slowly dropping to her sides. For the first time, she looked unsure of herself. What do you mean, it depends on us? She asked quietly. Adrian looked at her, his expression calm but firm. I mean exactly that, he said. You made a decision earlier without thinking about the consequences. Now you have to face them. Brian let out a slow breath and stepped forward slightly. Adrian, we didn't think it would go this far, he said. Adrian gave a small nod. But it did. Brian lowered his eyes, clearly struggling. We thought you didn't have anything. That you wouldn't fight back. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. So that made it easier, he asked. Brian had no answer. Grace finally stood up slowly from her chair, her movements careful, as if the weight of the moment rested on her shoulders. Adrian, she said softly, we made a mistake. Adrian looked at her, his expression softening just a little, but not enough to erase what had happened. Yes, he said. You did. Vanessa looked between them, frustration and discomfort mixing on her face. So what now? She asked. Are we just supposed to beg? Adrian shook his head gently. No, he replied. This isn't about begging. He took a few steps across the room, his voice steady and controlled. This is about understanding something very simple, he continued. Respect. The words settled in the air. It was not loud, but it carried meaning that could not be ignored. Adrian turned to face them fully again. You didn't respect me, he said. Not as family. Not as someone who built his life here. You saw what you thought was weakness, and you tried to take advantage of it. Vanessa opened her mouth, but stopped herself. This time, she knew better than to interrupt. Adrian noticed that. He noticed everything. Now the situation has changed, he went on. And you're all waiting to see what I'll do next. Brian nodded slowly. Yes, he admitted. Adrian paused for a moment, letting his next words carry weight. What I do next will show the difference between me and all of you. That caught their attention. Grace looked up at him again, hope flickering in her eyes. Vanessa frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. Adrian folded his arms loosely, not in defense, but in thought. I could ask you all to leave right now, he said. And legally, I would be right. Vanessa looked down. Brian remained silent. Grace held her breath. But I'm not going to do that, Adrian added calmly. That changed everything again. Brian looked up quickly. You're not? Adrian shook his head. No. Grace's eyes filled with relief, but Adrian raised his hand slightly, stopping that feeling from growing too quickly. Not because I've forgotten what happened, he said. And not because it didn't matter. Vanessa looked at him carefully now, trying to understand his thinking. Then why? She asked. Adrian took a slow breath. Because I want something better than what you showed me, he said. I want honesty. I want accountability. And I want to know if any of you are willing to admit the truth, without excuses. The room went quiet again, but this silence felt like a test. Brian was the first to respond. I was wrong, he said. His voice was low, but clear. I should have spoken up. I knew it didn't feel right. Adrian looked at him, studying his face, weighing his words. Then he nodded once. That's a start, he said. Grace stepped forward slightly. I was afraid, she admitted. I didn't want conflict. But staying silent, that was also wrong. Adrian's expression softened a little more. Yes, he said quietly. Then all eyes turned to Vanessa. She stood still, her mind clearly working through something. For once, she didn't rush to speak. She didn't defend herself immediately. That alone showed a shift. Finally, she looked at Adrian. I thought I was doing what was best for me, she said slowly. But I see now how I handled it was wrong. Adrian held her gaze for a moment. It wasn't full trust. Not yet. But it was something. Something real. He nodded slightly. That matters, he said. The tension in the room eased just a little, but not completely. There was still more to be said, more to be understood. Adrian straightened slightly, his voice steady again. This is not the end of the conversation, he said. It's the beginning of something new. But it depends on what happens next. He looked at each of them again, making sure they understood. Because trust is not rebuilt in one moment, he added. It takes time. It takes action. Brian nodded. Grace wiped her hands gently. Vanessa remained quiet, but attentive. Adrian then turned slightly, his tone shifting just a bit, as if he was speaking beyond the room again. If you're watching this, he said calmly, you've seen how quickly things can change when people act without thinking. His eyes held a quiet strength. So I want to hear from you, he continued. What would you do in this situation? He paused briefly. Would you forgive, or would you walk away? His voice remained steady, inviting, but powerful. Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments, he added. And if you believe in standing up for yourself, make sure you like and share this story, because someone out there might need to hear it. He turned back toward the room, his expression focused once again. Now, he said quietly, let's see who you really choose to become from here.